Dr. Benito is a clinical endocrinologist with an interest in the interaction of environmental factors, nutrition, environmental pollutants, stress, and stress with the endocrine system. She's passionate about educating her patients and giving them practical tools to improve well-being, which we're going to learn some of that today. She's board certified in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism. She attended medical school in Spain and completed a residency in internal medicine at Pennsylvania Hospital, the University of Pennsylvania Health System, and a fellowship in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism at the University of Pennsylvania. She also completed a 2-year fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona, where she's guest faculty. She's a certified meditation teacher and also currently studying herbal medicine at the David Winston Center for Herbal Studies. And it is with great pleasure that I, again, am welcoming Dr. Benito to share with us really useful, practical information on ways to prevent diabetes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope we'll all learn something. I want to set the stage about, if I can move this. Oh, okay, here we go. All right. So who needs to be listening to this talk? Are you somebody who has high risk for diabetes? So on the left, you see what makes you high risk for diabetes. So having a family history, being either Hispanic, African American, Alaska Native, Asian American, or Pacific Islander make you at risk for diabetes. If you're obese or don't exercise, if your birth was over 9 pounds, if you're a woman and when you were pregnant had gestational diabetes, so you had diabetes during pregnancy, if you've had a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, if you're over age 45, and your sleep is poor, so less than 6 hours or more than 9. Many times in this category, most people will have either a normal or a high normal fasting blood sugar. They might have some symptoms or some signs of fatty liver, but you may have none of this. I was just looking at myself, I have 3 of these risk factors for diabetes. So definitely need to put myself into this talk. If you have been diagnosed with prediabetes, that definitely puts you also at risk. Prediabetes is a condition where you're in between what we consider normal and what we diagnose as diabetes. So it's an in-between category. It may give you no symptoms, or you might notice that you have sugar cravings, maybe a bit of belly fat, some skin areas that are darker, especially in the knuckles or in your, under the breast straps for women, or shoulders and elbows, different areas of the body. You could have a bit of a dark in the back of the neck sometimes too. The key here is that if you do nothing, diabetes is likely to occur in between 5 to 10 years. Once you have been diagnosed with prediabetes, that will happen again unless you do something and you can get prevented, which is what we're going to talk today. If you were to do blood tests when you have prediabetes, your sugars will be higher than a normal person, but not as high as diabetes. So that's the range for a fasting blood sugar. This is usually not something we tend to do anymore, checking sugars after giving somebody a big load of sugar. But if you had one of those tests, you will see those high sugars. And this is probably a more common test that your doctor might have done. It's what we call a hemoglobin A1C. It's a long-term marker for sugar. The normal is less than 5.6 is normal. Diabetes is more than 6.5. So in between is prediabetes. So again, high risk of diabetes is when you're in one of these groups. Oh boy, here we go. Oh. There we go, okay. So what do we know about prediabetes, diabetes prevention? What do we know? Well, we know that diabetes can be prevented. In 2002, there was a large study called the USDPP study where more than 3,000 people were randomized, so were given either lifestyle and exercise, were given a medication, some of them called metformin, which we use for diabetes, or were just told that it was good to eat well, and that was it. They were let go on their own and try to figure out how to eat and how to exercise. So what the study showed after 3 years is that when people adhere to lifestyle and exercise, and you see what lifestyle meant for that group of people and what exercise meant, they were able to lose about 7% of their body weight. And doing that gave them a decreased risk of about 58%. So they cut down the risk by 58% to develop diabetes in just 3 years of doing this lifestyle and exercise. And again, it wasn't anything, convoluted. It was just less fat, fewer calories, and exercising for 150 minutes per week. Now, these people did have a coach that actually was checking on them every so often. Fast forward a few more years, and we now learn that inflammation is actually at the core of diabetes. So we actually give a webinar at Sappers when we actually talk about inflammation. So if you're interested, you can always take a look about how to combat inflammation. A few more years later, we start to learn about the importance of the intestinal microbiome, our gut flora. So we know that if our gut flora is not well balanced, which we call bacterial dysbiosis, that has been linked to metabolic syndrome, which is a precursor to diabetes, and diabetes. So again, another area where we could actually intervene to prevent diabetes. And what I think is really interesting is our new, and what I want to think is more of an individualized approach to eating, whether it's a time when you eat or how you fast. That seems to be also beneficial for diabetes, or to prevent diabetes. This is a summary of that talk on inflammation. I put this slide here with the egg, and it looks like I'm telling you to eat eggs to combat inflammation. It's actually not to eat anything that is cooked on a Teflon pan, just to make sure that you get the right message. So exercise, mindfulness, yoga, meditation, avoiding these toxins, avoiding sitting for prolonged periods of time, make sure you have social support, make sure you sleep. And then these are the foods that have data to prevent diabetes. All of those foods, anything that is rich in polyphenols, these plant pigments, in particular the ones that give you red and blue colors, foods that are high in magnesium, foods high in fiber, and those high in omega-3s, all of them have data for diabetes prevention. Now, there are many ways of eating, and all of them have some data that they could help with sugar regulation. Whether you look at low glycemic index, Mediterranean diet, vegetarian, or Paleolithic diets, they all show decrease in that A1C. Of all these, the one that has data to prevent diabetes is the Mediterranean diet. Now, if you adhere to a low glycemic index, although the data is not conclusive for prevention of diabetes, if you add a high fiber to your diet, that will help you prevent diabetes. You see the description in case you are not familiar with any one of these ways of eating. You see what they focus on. But again, they all have data that they will definitely reduce your A1C, that sugar marker. They all help it. If you think of vegetarian diets, they help you lose weight. Remember, in that study, the DPP study, they show that if you lost 7% of your body weight, you reduce the risk of diabetes. So if a vegetarian diet is able to help you lose weight, in turn, it will help you prevent diabetes. In general, we know what healthy is versus unhealthy for eating. We know that dietary patterns that are associated with a reduction of the risk of type 2 diabetes are those that are characterized by a high intake of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, fish and poultry, and are low in red meat, processed foods, sugar-sweetened beverages, and starchy foods. So Western diets, we know, are associated with a higher risk of diabetes, both in men and women. A Western diet usually includes higher red and processed meats, sweets, desserts, French fries, and refined grains. So you want to do this to prevent diabetes, and you want to try to avoid doing this. This is what we know about what things you can eat that will help you prevent diabetes. So again, the low carb, low GI, low glycemic index ways of eating, high fiber, high in antioxidants, healthy fats, including walnuts. And of course, this would be part of your healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids. So it's more about sustenance. It's more of what helps you bring that prevention for diabetes. All right, so we know that high glycemic foods, so those such as sugary foods or drinks, white bread, and other processed foods, are those that are gonna give you very abrupt spikes and falls in blood sugar. And by doing that, they stimulate centers in your brain that are involved with hunger and with cravings. They also cause lethargy when you have that huge spike in sugar. In general, these are foods that are more likely to cause diabetes. Interestingly, herbalists have used bitter foods for, I guess, millennia to help people who have sugar cravings. They help break the sugar addiction. In addition, bitter herbs help you stimulate digestion, absorption, and elimination. In most recent studies, most recent data, we know that bitters also decrease your food consumption. So if you start your meal by eating something that is rich in bitters, so either radicchio, arugula, broccoli wrapped, dandelion greens, burdock roots, any of those, that actually is going to make you not eat as much. And we know now from science studies that we have bitter receptors in our guts, in our pancreas, which, if you don't know, pancreas actually helps you make this hormone called insulin, which regulates your sugars, also in your brains, which is why I think herbalists use bitters to help us, break that sugar addiction. So we've gone a bit more about the what so far. We talk about what to avoid, what things to include in our diet. We're going to talk now about the when and the how. All right, so first the how. So this is the data based on studies. We know that for every lunch that you prepare at home during a week, your risk of type 2 diabetes goes down about 2% for every lunch, every one, just one lunch. And for every dinner, your risk goes down by 4%. For those people who eat between 11 to 14 home-prepared meals per week, the risk of developing diabetes type 2 was 13% lower than those who only ate 6 or less homemade meals per week. Now, this is the data, at least in 2010. Less than 33% of household meals share more than twice per week. That's staggering, right? And about 50% of American meals are consumed outside the home. So this is where we are, we were in 2010 at least. And this is what we have to aim for, is to try to eat at least home-prepared meals. If not at home, at least home-prepared meals. A bit more about the how. This is from a study by Christopher Gardner. And Christopher Gardner is a big researcher. He's done a lot of the studies on trying to compare diets. And he's been big on comparing like the low fat with the low carb and what is better for weight loss, what's better for diabetes. So this is another one of his studies where they were comparing these two forms of eating, so low carb versus low fat. Well, this is what he says in the end. The people who lost the most weight reported that the study had changed their relationship with food. They no longer ate in their cars or in front of their television screens, and they were cooking more at home and sitting down to eat dinner with their families, for example. That's incredible, correct? Now, he also said, people who cut back on added sugars, refined grains, and highly processed foods, so this is your high glycemic index foods, right? So people who cut back on those while concentrating on eating plenty of vegetables and whole foods without worrying about counting calories or limiting portion sizes, lost significant amounts of weight over the course of a year, regardless of diet. So again, you concentrate on eating plenty of vegetables and whole foods. Don't worry about counting calories, limiting portion sizes. These people lost weight. And again, if you lose weight, your risk of diabetes goes down. I want to talk a bit about the when. And this is data that I think is really intriguing, and we're getting more and more studies on what we call time-restricted feeding. So time-restricted feeding is limiting your food intake to a particular amount of time in the day. So you can do, what we normally do is to eat between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., but you can restrict the time when you eat to, doing even 6 hours, at the most 10. In the studies, when they restricted the time of eating to 10 hours per day compared to 14 hours, those people had better weight, better sleep, and better energy. Just really, I think, amazing. So we know that eating between those 6 to 12 hours improves our weight, improves our insulin, again, this hormone that helps you control sugar, improves blood pressure, and lowers your appetite. So when we eat and how frequently we eat might be as important as what we eat. We do know that our body metabolism will change throughout the day. If you eat a slice of bread in the morning at breakfast, it doesn't make your sugars go high or as high, and it doesn't make you make so much fat from it as if you eat the same slice of bread in the evening. So eating early might be a better way to regulate this pancreatic production of insulin and helping your appetite. I've been really intrigued by fasting. We have data now on alternate day fasting, 2-day week fasting. That doesn't seem to be that impressive. At least the data that I've seen doesn't really tell me a whole lot of benefits from those ways of eating or manipulating how you eat. What I've been really intrigued is on the work of Walter Longo. Walter Longo is a researcher originally from Italy, but who is now in California. And he's created what he calls a fasting mimicking diet. And this is a diet that is plant-based, is low calorie, low protein, low in carbohydrates, but is high in unsaturated fats. So meaning olives, olive oil, nuts, seeds, avocados, coconut oil, all those. That's what's high in this diet. He calls it the fasting mimicking diet because when you eat this way, it's similar to doing a water fasting, but you're not really fasting. He does this, or he recommends you do it for 5 consecutive days, once a month, and ideally for a whole year, but probably even for 3 months, it brings benefits. He has really intriguing data on the improvement of sugar metabolism, gut microbiome, lower of inflammation, and most recently, he's actually shown that it can protect the beta cells in the pancreas, the cells that actually make insulin, and it can actually help you protect them, which is what we want to do when we're trying to prevent diabetes. We're trying to get those cells to work well. So very, very intriguing data. I want to mention a little bit, I'm going to switch gears a little bit now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about supplements, only because I think it's important that we bring it into the conversation. To me, in general, the sum is better than the individual parts. And what I mean by that is that no supplement can take the place of healthy eating. It doesn't matter how many supplements you take. If you don't find a way of eating that supports you, it supports your metabolism, it really doesn't matter how many supplements you take. Supplements are only that, they're supplements. Now, there are many supplements that you're going to find on a health food store, or somebody's going to tell you, oh, this improves your sugar metabolism. However, there are very few that have data for diabetes prevention. So I listed all the ones that have been shown to have some degree of efficacy in either sugar regulation, something. So I start with apple cider vinegar. It has data for prediabetes and diabetes. And again, it's mostly data for sugar regulation. Aloe vera has data in prediabetes, and again, it's also data for insulin sensitivity. It makes your body more sensitive, more responsive to insulin. Berberine only has data for metabolic syndrome, this precursor for diabetes, as well as for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Bitter melon has data for prediabetes, and again, it's mixed data. One study was positive, was beneficial, one study wasn't. Chromium, interestingly, only has data for type 2 diabetes, actually. It doesn't have data for prediabetes at all. Cinnamon has data both for prediabetes and diabetes, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. Curcumin, which is the chemical in turmeric, has data for the prevention of diabetes. So that and magnesium are the only 2 on this list that have data for diabetes prevention. Again, the other ones, what they have data for is to tell you that your sugars might improve, not that they can overall or over the long term prevent you from getting diabetes, right? Fenugreek has data in obese patients. It also lowers sugars in those patients. Grapeseed extract, you see it there as well for type 2 diabetes, no data in diabetes. Magnesium has data, but again, the data is only as food. There's no data for magnesium as a supplement in the prevention of diabetes. Resveratrol has data in diabetes, and vitamin D has data for pre-diabetes, and it's mixed. Again, one study was good, one study wasn't, although the studies might not have been as good as we might have hoped. So again, I'm not saying that they will not help your sugars. Again, some of them have data to help your sugars, But if you are looking to prevent diabetes, only curcumin and magnesium as food help you prevent diabetes. So I want to mention cinnamon, and I want to mention it because cinnamon is food to me, and you can use cinnamon as food. Cinnamon is a spice. It's rich in polyphenols, and again, polyphenols are these plant pigments, these compounds in plant pigments. It's what gives color to the plants, and are anti-inflammatories. There are two kinds of cinnamon. You probably know the Ceylon cinnamon, the true cinnamon, and then the cassia, which is the false cinnamon. The cassia or the false cinnamon has something called coumarins. And coumarins have been a concern in some studies because they seem, or they might, cause some liver toxicity. It's not entirely clear. And I put here this study that showed that even in subjects that took quite a bit of coumarins for 12 weeks, they didn't develop any liver problems. So we think at this point that it's more of an individualized reaction that some people have for this type of cinnamon. So if you're not sure, it's probably better to take the true cinnamon so that you avoid any potential liver toxicity. What do we know about cinnamon? What's the data? Well, in laboratory studies, we know that it lowers your blood sugar. It also improves your lipids, so your cholesterol, triglycerides, all those. Whether you use cinnamon as the food, as a spice, or you use the extract, both of them will lower fasting blood glucose in people with diabetes and prediabetes. This is how it works. It works as signaling insulin. This is one of the receptors for insulin. It helps with transport of glucose, and it has an effect on the emptying of the stomach. When I look at the data for cinnamon, the data is definitely strongest, either for those who have prediabetes or for those who have diabetes type 2 that is poorly controlled. So if you know that you have diabetes and your A1C is over 8%, that is when cinnamon might be beneficial for you. If you look at an extract, this is what they recommend, but you can actually do it with powdered cinnamon. Just get the powdered cinnamon or powder yourself, 3 to 6 grams a day. So between 2 to 4 teaspoons a day of cinnamon is what most studies have shown. But there's a study that even with 1 gram, which is a little bit less than a teaspoon, that was beneficial. So you don't need a whole lot of cinnamon, and that could be beneficial. And again, I probably would use cinnamon as food, not as a supplement. I don't think there's a difference. Okay. So curcumin does have data for diabetes prevention. Curcumin is a chemical that is part of turmeric. Curcumin has data for being anti-inflammatory and also for being anti-diabetic, so to fight diabetes. And the data comes from a study where they showed that, again, these beta cells in the pancreas had a better function when people took curcumin, and it delayed the progression to type 2 diabetes. Okay, that's what we're talking about. It delayed the progression to type 2 diabetes, so it prevents that diabetes development. The doses that have been shown to work were 750 of curcuminoids twice daily for at least 3 months. Now, if you were to put that into food, 1 teaspoon of turmeric gives you at the most 100 milligrams of curcumin. So you end up having about 15 teaspoons of turmeric per day. So this is one that if you were interested, you might do as a supplement, not as a food, just because as a food, I think it will be hard to get to those doses. Now you can always put turmeric in your food as part of an integrative, plan to prevent diabetes. You don't have to take a supplement. I'm not saying you need to. You have to be cautious. Although curcumin we think is well tolerated, it may cause nausea or diarrhea. And you have to be cautious. If you have gallbladder disease, it can make it worse. And if you're taking blood thinners, it's a bit of a blood thinner. So I think, for me, who I consider myself a high risk for diabetes, I don't take curcumin supplements, but I eat turmeric, and I will put it in my smoothies and I will put it in my food, as well as many other polyphenols. Now, magnesium, I think, is important because we definitely have lots of data that we know that in population studies, so when we look at groups of people, large groups of people, those who have the highest intake, the highest amount of magnesium through food, they have a lower risk of developing diabetes. This is almost as big as with that study that I showed you in the very beginning with the lifestyle and exercise. Now, we also know that in America, about 80% of ours don't have enough magnesium in our diets. The amount of magnesium we need is 420 milligrams for men, 320 for women. These are foods that are rich in magnesium. And I just give you a little bit of a sample of how much magnesium you have in those. So a cup of chard, which is probably one of the highest sources of magnesium, gives you 175 milligrams of magnesium, and this is cooked, a cup cooked, right? So once you cook it, a cup of that cooked chard is 175. So that's a lot of chard. Same with spinach, gives you about 157, pretty close. Black beans, 1 cup of cooked black beans, 120. Quinoa is similar to the cup of black beans. Dark chocolate, which we all love, well, maybe not all of us, gives you 64 milligrams of magnesium. And if you do a handful of almonds, that's close to 80 milligrams of magnesium. So, you know, to get to even 320 for a woman, it really involves a lot of, you know, foods that have magnesium, which is why, you know, I'm not surprised that, you know, many of us don't have enough magnesium. I just want to reiterate that there's no data on magnesium supplementation for diabetes prevention. Now, I put a question mark over better function with these 2 supplements. You see them a lot, and I get a lot of questions about them, and that's why I include them in this talk. So people ask about chromium, and they ask about zinc. And again, I told you that there was no data on chromium in pre-diabetes. The data is for diabetes. But chromium, we know that when you have low levels, it can interfere with glucose metabolism that is healthy. So low levels is bad for you, right? If you're talking about glucose metabolism, which is why people talk about chromium if you're concerned about glucose metabolism. So without having data to back it up as a supplement, what I recommend is that you include any of those foods that are rich in chromium. And perhaps if you tolerate brewer's yeast, there have been some studies with it where it could be beneficial. But again, you have a lot to choose from. And I'm sure that you can find something that your body agrees with in that list. Same with zinc. Zinc is also important for insulin, which is, again, this hormone that is good to help our sugar regulation, not only for the release of insulin, but also for the signaling, how insulin works in the body. Zinc is mostly abundant in red meat, chicken, oysters, but also in vegetarian sources such as legumes, nuts, whole grains. If you are vegetarian and you want to maximize the absorption of zinc, which is a little bit harder to absorb than from meat products, you either want to germinate or sprout your legumes, or you want to soak them. Either one will eliminate something called phytates, which is actually what binds the zinc and doesn't let it get absorbed by your body. So you soak them, you sprout, and then you will eliminate this phytates and allow the zinc to be absorbed. So I want to summarize by saying that healthy eating has been shown to prevent diabetes. And that just means that you eat more whole foods and more vegetables. That if you eat meals that have been either prepared at home or you eat them at home, that also prevents diabetes. Eating mindfully prevents diabetes. We all should be aiming to include foods that are rich in magnesium, fiber, and any anti-inflammatory polyphenols or fats, because all of those have data for diabetes prevention. And I put a question mark on fasting and time-restricted feeding, because I think that data, although very impressive, is still sort of, very early on in the research. But I think they offer something new that might fit the way that you wanna eat. So thank you.
I want to again thank you, Dr. Benito, for this wealth of information, practical advice.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And this will be up on our website shortly, within about a week or so. But we will be announcing some other programming coming up soon. And hope to see you and hope everybody is doing well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.